A peace deal in the war against Iran started by the US and Israel looks closer. And this time, it's not just Donald Trump saying it. The Iranian Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister of Mediators Pakistan have also signalled their optimism. And the American president has made some big promises.
The Strait will officially open as soon as we sign, which could be soon, very soon, maybe over the weekend. In Europe, I won't be able to be there.
And the world now waits to find out what has been agreed on the vexed issues of Iran's right to enrich uranium and to control the Strait of Hormuz. Also on the day, the EU's new migration policy comes into force with tougher border controls and stricter rules on asylum. But can it deliver on promises to better manage migrant flows, or is it pandering to the politicians? I'm Phil Gale. Welcome to The Day. We start with Donald Trump's latest promise of an imminent peace deal with Iran. He's done so many times over the more than 3 months of war with little actual progress to show for it. But this time, the US president seems more confident than ever. Here he is yesterday speaking on a tele-rally call.
I don't know if you heard, but we ended the war with Iran today, and they have agreed never to have a nuclear weapon, something that we insisted on. That was the whole purpose. That was 95% of it. And they've done it in the most powerful way you can do it.
And more stakeholders are weighing in. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi posted on X that an agreement had never been closer. And the Prime Minister of Pakistan, which has been hosting negotiations between the US and Iran, also chimed in, posting on X, "We can confirm that a final agreed-upon text of the peace deal has been reached, and Pakistan is now working closely with both sides to finalise the next steps." Well, exactly what has been agreed remains a matter of conjecture and contention. President Trump has accused Iranian officials of lying about the contents of the deal. Posting on social media, he said the terms that Iran leaked out to the fake news have nothing to do with the terms that were agreed in writing. He went on to say that Iran's negotiators were very dishonourable people to deal with. With them, there is no such thing as dealing in good faith. Amazing. Maleki is a senior fellow with the Iran programme at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracy in Washington, D.C. He played a leading role in creating and coordinating US sanctions programmes against the Iranian regime and its proxies. Welcome to DW. Donald Trump has been saying that a deal is in sight almost for as long as he's been bombing Iran. The country's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, is now being quoted as saying that an agreement has never been closer. So this sounds like actual progress.
Well, I mean, it's difficult to know exactly who has the better picture of the status of the talks. Now, when you have intermediaries, when you have Omanis, Qataris, Pakistanis, a chain of intermediaries involved in these negotiations, they tend to be very optimistic about where things are in talks. They keep signaling messages or relaying messages between both sides that might sound more optimistic or positive than they are. And President Trump could be responding to those. It could be just echoing what he's hearing from the intermediaries as being very optimistic about the status of the deal. But also it could be the case that the Iranians are showing a lot of interest in getting the deal, because that would be what I would expect as well. I mean, they're under a lot of pressure. They really desperately need to get out of the current situation. So the Iranian regime tends to lie about the status of things. Historically, that's been the case. So it could be that they're also very desperate behind closed doors, but they also have domestic audiences, their core supporters, that they have to message something different.
And is that chain of mediators one of the reasons why we seem to have this confusion about what's in any deal that may or may not have been reached? Because Donald Trump has been quoted as saying that the version leaked to Iranian media is not what is actually in the deal. Is that what's going on, do you think?
That could be a part of the problem. The other part of the problem or the reality here is the Iranian regime, they have to also convince their domestic supporters, as I mentioned, that whatever deal they end up signing, it's a win. It's a victory for the regime. So what I saw in Iranian media is more of a propaganda than actually what is probably what's being discussed or what's being negotiated. They're really good. The Iranian regime is really good at taking, 4 or 5% facts and add 95% propaganda and rhetorics and turn it into something that would serve their agenda. So at this point, what I'm seeing coming out of Iranian media is probably some elements of facts to that, such as some elements of the sanctions relief that they could be negotiating over Iran's access to frozen funds, but the rest sound very more of a rhetoric and propaganda than reality.
Right. Tell us more then about the domestic audience you described that the regime has to satisfy, because for those of us who don't watch what happens in Iran that closely, the appearance is always that the leaders' rule is absolute, but you're saying they have an audience to satisfy.
Oh, absolutely. I think here's the thing. They have lost legitimacy with a big portion of the population. You saw in January, they had to kill over 30,000, probably more than 40,000 Iranians who were protesting the regime or protesting against the regime. They had to kill their way out of the situation in January. And these protests are happening very often. Every year, every couple months, they have some kind of protest in Iran. There's a huge gap between the regime and its people. However, they do have a core supporters. I would say somewhere between 5 to 15% of the population that still support this regime. Some of them are ideological. Some of them are because of financial, personal, individual interest. And this 10, 15, 5% of the population has been overpromised by this regime for years. They've been promising their supporters that they're going to annihilate Israel. They're going to move or force U.S. bases out of the region, that they're going to have a nuclear program that creates or make him less dependent on fossil fuel, when in fact this nuclear program has brought them to the point they're in today, in a war and conflict and inflation rate of 80%, and only produces 10% of electricity for the country. So they have to also convince that 5, 10, 15% of the population that they support them. And that's why you're hearing these type of messages coming out of Tehran that the deal is very good, then it's really in their interest.
So this notion then of and we can see how in a negotiation everybody needs to be able to present to their audiences a win. But the major stumbling blocks on this seem so black and white, so yes or no. Nuclear enrichment, reopening the Strait of Hormuz, whether the deal includes Lebanon or not. Those all seem, on the face of it, yes or no issues.
Yeah, from our point of view, yes, they have to be yes and no. But Iranians are really good at bringing things into a gray area. So on the nuclear front, whether it's a no enrichment whatsoever permanently, or if it's for 20 years, for 15 years, or some kind of an agreement that things would be revisited after 15 years or 20 years, very similar to JCPOA, some sunset that clauses that were included in the agreement. So I think the Iranian regime is pushing these from being a yes or no situation to something in the gray area. And I think in the Washington, D.C., in the White House, there's a desire to pause things, reach some kind of agreement, have a ceasefire. And I think Iran is trying to leverage that desire that they're sensing from D.C., from the White House, and bring those yes or no problems into kind of a gray area and buy themselves time to go back to their playbook of dragging out negotiations and just buying themselves time to get into another U.S. administration, cut another deal. It's the same thing that they've been playing, the game that they've been playing for years now.
But isn't that long-term, protracted nitpicking with details, isn't that necessarily part of this system? Whatever gets agreed, and they're talking about, or Trump has been talking about a deal being signed in Geneva on Sunday. We'll see. But whatever is agreed as a result of this will then have to be negotiated for months and maybe even years later, because this surely can only be a sort of a heads of agreement, an agreement in principle. The details will take some doing.
Absolutely. The detail is going to be taking months. And I think Iranians understand that the US government here is going to extend the ceasefire. Even if it's a 60-day ceasefire, they're going to be extended and the talks are going to continue. They're going to wait out another US administration, get into another administration. Remember, these guys are more afraid of the internal threat than external threat at this point. So they're going to have to deal with their internal issues. And if they're involved in some kind of negotiations with the West, they're buying themselves time. And if there's some sanctions relief that come with those negotiations, as was the case in previous US administration, when you had an absence of enforcement of sanctions, because they were engaging in negotiations with Iran, the absence of enforcement of sanctions provides sanctions relief indirectly. So that's kind of an environment they want to be back in, that they're talking, they're negotiating at the same time, the sanctions are not being enforced. Therefore, they can start getting some of the revenue from oil and petrochemical sales and start rebuilding their economy, and they're building their missile, drones capabilities, and go back to the state that they were before war.
It's a fascinating analysis, and we thank you for it. Miad Maleki from the Foundation for the Defence of Democracy.
Thank you.